Hello listeners, Jordan here. I just want to let you know that you can listen to Nighttime early and ad-free on Amazon Music. Include it with Prime.
You are listening to the Nighttime Podcast.
Hello listeners, and welcome to the latest episode of the Nighttime Podcast's Sunday Night Discussion Series. If you're new here, I'm Jordan Bonaparte, and the Sunday Night Show is a sort of loose discussion-based series in which I'm joined by investigative journalist Paul Palango and defense lawyer and legal analyst Adam Rodgers. The topics we cover range from developing stories of Canadian crime, to corruption, and on to controversial topics of public interest. During this week's episode, which we recorded and broadcast live on the Nighttime Podcast YouTube channel, we're going to discuss a tragedy that has literally gripped Nova Scotia since it occurred last week. On Monday evening, news broke of a fatal stabbing just footsteps from the busy entrance to the Halifax Shopping Centre. The victim, Ahmad Al Marrach, is a 16-year-old boy, and the two perpetrators, one of whom seemed to be gloating about their brutal act online, are only 14 years old. In tonight's discussion, we're going to break down this disturbing story, and legal analyst Adam Rodgers is going to discuss the impact Canada's Youth Criminal Justice Act plays in the pursuit of justice for 16-year-old Ahmad Al Marrach. Mr. Adam Rodgers, Mr. Paul Palango, it's Sunday night, and that could only mean one thing. It's time for us to discuss stories of Canadian crime, controversy, controversial topics. We have all of that and more in the story tonight. But before we get into it, let's hear from you guys. Mr. Palango, I haven't heard from you since last Sunday. What have you been up to? What's new?
I've had an exciting week. I mean, the best part of it is watching the Toronto Maple Leafs lose again. If the Leafs win, I can't sleep at night. And watching them lose as badly as they did the other night made me sleep like a baby.
So you're like a hate watcher? You don't miss a game and you just shake your
I put a
fist
curse on them in 1967 when they last won the Stanley Cup. I remember I was in the living room of my parents' house on the floor watching the game, and the Leafs won, and I just hit my head and I cursed them, and it's worked so far.
Okay. Paul, we probably have a lot of new listeners tuning in tonight for a variety of reasons. One is just last week I was a guest on what's called Morbid Podcast, which is one of the largest podcasts in the world, certainly in America. A lot of people are checking out the show as a result of my appearance there. Why don't you introduce yourself? Who is Paul Palango, and what makes you someone we shouldn't curse in 1967?
I've been a journalist since 1974. Off and on. I've written 5 books on the RCMP, 4 of them published, 1 about to be published. I've written a couple of other books that didn't get published for various reasons involving bad people who wanted to harm me and others. Mm-hmm. And I'm still working the case of the Nova Scotia massacre, which brought me back to journalism. So 4 years on, I'm still reporting on the story.
Interesting. If there is a story happening in Canada that the powers that be do not want shared, Paul Palango is the guy who gets into it and ends up sharing the story. That's how I would.
It is strange. It's sort of like I've become this Zelig-like character as I'm reviewing what I've done in my life. Big things happen in Canada, and I've happened to be in many of these places over the last 40 or 50 years. And writing the most recent book brought it all back to me.
Your most recent book published is called 22 Murders, and it was the Canadian best-selling book covering the Nova Scotia mass casualty and the RCMP response and failings.
The subtitle sort of summarized it. The massacres, the cover-up, and the obstacles to justice in Nova Scotia. And the follow-up book will elaborate on that, and I think bring home what the real story is.
I like it. Now, Adam Rodgers, you got a lot going on. I'll help you with the bio. So you have a YouTube channel called The Rodgers Brief, in which you provide legal analysis on, you describe it. What is the
Well,
Rodgers
it's usually Canadian-based legal stories, things that I think either need further explanation from a legal perspective or else are maybe underappreciated in their legal aspects, right? So I'll check out cases that are at the Supreme Court that maybe should get more attention, or stories in the news that should have, a little deeper dive from a legal perspective. But I also, I was a lawyer in the Desmond Inquiry, and became familiar with inquiry law through that process, and then covered the Mass Casualty Commission as sort of a legal expert, in a sense, looking at the daily machinations of it, how structured, what was going on in the inquiry itself, and making trying to bring some clarity to people, I guess, in a common sense, plain spoken way, but from a legal perspective.
Mm-hmm. You say you're a lawyer. You're specifically a defense lawyer, though, right? That would be your specialty?
That's right. I do mostly criminal defense work now, although throughout my career I've done, I still do some civil litigation. I've done a wide variety of things, but now mostly focused on criminal defense work. Some experience in the Youth Criminal Justice Act, as we'll discuss tonight. But yeah,
that's it.
That's what I do.
So I was curious. Do you have, or have you taken many cases that would be handled by the Youth Criminal Justice Act? Like, is that something you've worked on?
Yeah, I have a case this week, a significant one with the Youth Criminal Justice Act is involved, and there's some discussions about, plea strategy and all these things. And so I was sort of refreshing on the Youth Criminal Justice Act for that reason, and also in preparation for tonight. But no, I've had a few, some serious ones. One of my first murder case I did was a 14-year-old charged with murder in Inverness. Geez, almost 15 years ago.
Okay.
And there's been a number of them. So, but you deal with youth matters all the time. Typically not that serious, not at the level that we're going to be discussing. But young offenders are not uncommon.
Okay. Let me introduce the story, and then we'll get into it, because I have a million questions for you about the Youth Criminal Justice Act. Despite covering crime and following so many of these stories, it's rare to see the Youth Criminal Justice Act get the kind of criticism it's getting right now here in Nova Scotia. But let's start with the story. We're just going to go back to Monday of last week. Just after 5 p.m., Halifax police were called to reports of a stabbing in the indoor parking lot of the Halifax Shopping Centre. I'm going to play you just a short news clip that was from the evening news on Monday that described the story as it was at the time.
Halifax Regional Police say the death of a male youth who was found injured in a parking lot Monday afternoon is now being investigated as a homicide. Officers were called to the Halifax Shopping Centre shortly after 5 p.m. on Monday, where they found the injured boy. He was rushed to the hospital, where he later died. About 20 minutes later, police arrested 2 suspects on a Halifax transit bus. This was near North Street. Few details have been released at this point. Police say the investigation is in its early stages. Anyone with information about the incident or video from the area during that time, though, is asked to contact police.
So that's how the story first starts. There's a lot of discussion online where this, outside of the Halifax Shopping Centre, the area that the police were responding to, and there was a pretty significant police presence there in this response, is like a major intersection. So there was a lot of posts going out across social media of, what is going on at the mall. Of course, this news comes out that there was a stabbing involving a youth. Very quickly, the news comes out that the youth passed away at the hospital, and it's now being investigated as a homicide. But there's a bit of relief when we hear that 2 people were arrested in the north end of Halifax on a Halifax city bus. So people believe, that whatever happened, there's going to be at least immediate closure in terms of public safety. But that turned out to not at all be the case, because very shortly after, there was another update that I'm going to share with you, and that was that the suspects were released.
Police say they are continuing to investigate the homicide of 16-year-old Ahmad Al Marrach after 2 youths have been released without charges in relation to the incident that took place in the parking lot at the Halifax Shopping Centre on Monday.
We're not able to release specifics in relation to the suspects, but we certainly can confirm to the public, and we want to assure them that we do have suspects that we're looking at, and we are moving this case forward.
McLeod says investigators do not believe this was a random act and is asking the public to refrain from circulating circulating videos of the incident on social media.
For 2 points. One, it could impact the investigation, and certainly that's important. But more importantly, there's a family out there that this is a very tragic incident. It could be very disturbing and traumatic to them.
We'll be thinking of the family of the young man that was killed yesterday in Halifax.
Halifax Regional Council took a moment of silence Tuesday to pay their respects to the victim, while members of the community say they are shaken up by the tragedy.
You can't bring him back.
HRP is asking the public to bring any information or video from the area to police.
So it's all of a sudden, the story's changed dramatically. When these suspects are released, very little information is out to the public. We know that it's a child who was murdered, a 16-year-old. But it's at this point that something interesting starts to happen. And that is that there's really no information given to the public from the Halifax police, but the online discussion and discourse surrounding this murder and the people alleged to be responsible for it just went wild. So the murder happens on Monday, but for the days leading up to the eventual arrest that we're going to hear about, there were near endless discussions online about who was responsible, what they did, where they were hiding. And, it's not uncommon for those kinds of discussions to take place in the vacuum that exists when there's not official information coming from the police. But this was different because a lot of this was playing out on social media. So people were quick to find little pieces of evidence and share them in, the various discussion groups or whatnot. And some information began to spread that is pretty concerning. I'm going to show you a couple things and kind of talk you through them. Very quickly, in the aftermath of the murder, a video was circulating online that showed not the actual stabbing that ended his life or the altercation that leads up to that. It showed the aftermath of the stabbing. The video, and I would caution anyone to not seek this out or try to see it, but to give you a sense of what it shows the young man on the ground, severely injured, bleeding, and a small group of youth surrounding him that seemed to not have any idea what to do. Quotes like, should we call police? What should we do? What can we do next? It doesn't seem like people, should we put pressure on the wound? And all this is happening as the 16-year-old boy is taking his last breaths, bleeding out in the parking lot of the Halifax Shopping Centre. So as that's spreading around, of course, people want to know who's responsible for this. Very quickly, the people alleged to be responsible are identified, and an interesting and disturbing thing happens is the young man who will eventually get arrested for this, he changes his Instagram profile's bio. Like when you have an Instagram account, you have a little bio to kind of describe yourself. He changes it seemingly to gloat about what he's done. He changes his bio to, and I'm going to read it to you in the best way I can because it's a lot of like shorthand and stuff, but he says, "Smoke 'em, 1-0. And then a picture of like kind of a stork flying. Some people believe that is reference to him killing one person. He then says, or the bio then says, only 14, free me. I'll be home soon. # free me. # 187, which is, I don't know if we do that in Canada, but that is like, I think the American shorthand for police radio for murder. So he posts this online on Instagram. People find that and take that as he's gloating. And another thing happens that's very disturbing is a picture of the two children who are said to be responsible begins to spread around social media. It shows a young man with his arms around a young woman. The young man is giving the camera the finger. And very clearly he has a large, what looks to be kitchen knife or steak knife sticking out of his pocket. It's alleged that this photo was taken the day of the stabbing. I'm going to play you the last clip, and this relates to the arrest of these people, which didn't take place until later in the week. And then we can talk about what this all means.
Halifax Regional Police say two 14-year-olds arrested in Sackville on Wednesday night are now facing murder charges. Some parents say they were not notified about increased police presence and precautionary measures that were taken at several Sackville area schools in recent days, leaving many feeling uneasy.
I have been
terrified. Like, we have barely slept. I know a lot of parents have kept their kids home because nobody knows anything. We're scared, all of us.
Now, feeling a bit of comfort with the charges. Some students at Sackville High School telling Global News several students were absent Wednesday.
It's a little bit like, it's nerve-wracking slightly. Like, a lot of my friends aren't coming to school, so I'm kind of at school alone.
Robichaud says she's feeling disappointed, saying Halifax Regional Centre for Education and the police left the community in the dark.
Essentially, the threat level has been left to the public to communicate amongst each other. And there's been a lot of conflicting stories and rumors on the internet.
HRCE telling Global News in a statement, quote, Wednesday, as a precaution, RCMP officers maintained a visible presence at or near some schools in the Sackville area. HRCE staff cooperated fully with police as they handled an ongoing investigation. The RCMP has confirmed there is no longer a need for additional presence, and officers have returned to routine patrolling on or near the schools. The two youth are scheduled to appear in court on Friday morning. Global News has confirmed Al Marrach's family is aware of the charges and hope that the two accused will be tried as adults.
So we're just about caught up to present day, but I want to pass it off to you. So first of all, Paul, one thing I wanted to ask you about, as I'm hearing this story, especially in that news clip, when we hear members of the community discussing, fear, uncertainty, lack of information coming from the police, and in this case, the school board, it just reminds me a lot of some stories that you've covered. Do you have anything to say about this part of the story?
Well, the whole issue of dealing with juvenile criminals, underage criminals, ties the police up in knots.
Mm-hmm.
That we've, as a society, opted to give underage criminals their privacy because it's deemed they don't know what they're doing. Their brains aren't fully developed, and they've got to be saved for a later day. Their lives, they may have fruitful lives sometime in the future, and this moment of wrongdoing can't be used against them forever. However, there has been no recognition either by the politicians or the police about what is happening, especially with the effect right across society, the effect of social media and on young people, and especially the violence that's being perpetrated by them. Mm-hmm. This is not an isolated incident. Mm-hmm. Two 14-year-olds, a boy and a girl who's gaga about having a bad boy as a boyfriend. That's not new. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you look, I just went and did a little survey about any cases like this recently. There was one in Wales on the weekend, like last weekend. Same kind of thing. A 13-year-old girl charged with 3 counts of attempted murder after 2 teachers and a pupil were stabbed. 11-year-old in Chicago charged. 2 14-year-olds in Toronto charged in December 20. 14-year-old girl charged with a boy in a stabbing on the Toronto subway in February. A 13-year-old stabbed a woman to death in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania last week. 12 and 13-year-olds charged in February in Saskatoon for killing a 12-year-old. 2 years earlier, April 22, 2 13s, a 14, 15, and 16 charged with killing a 27-year-old. I could go on and on and on, but the point is there's something drastic going on here that needs to be dealt with at a higher level than just saying, oh, well, these two are just, an isolated incident. It's not isolated. There's a pattern right across North America and the world, and it's largely, as you can see, being driven by social media.
Mm-hmm. Certainly. Yeah. And that was my first thought when I saw he's one of the first things he does after this seems to be update his Instagram profile to gloat about this. So we see so many crimes that involve live streaming and it being filmed and put online for clout. So that certainly has a part in it. But, it's like teenagers, and especially the younger, even on the younger side of teenagers, they're the ones who truly scare me because I feel like they can, if they're brought up incorrectly, they have nothing to lose. They don't have the life skills to kind of identify that. I just feel like
it's an entire generation. There are good kids And there are kids who are trying, and there are kids who are brought up and have parents who act as parents, not as friends or enablers. But you have, it's quite clear that you have a large contingent in this generation who are essentially empty vessels. They're, without morals, without any sense of the future, and who are, as Kurt Cobain said, they're there to be entertained and make their own entertainment. And their entertainment is doing things like this. They think that's relevant. They have no sense of the damage they're doing to other people and to society.
And themselves.
And to themselves. They're just completely out of it because they have no context for their own lives.
Let's pass it to you, Adam Rodgers. Let's start, though, with your initial thoughts on hearing that two 14-year-olds are responsible for a fatal stabbing outside of a mall in Halifax. Given your background, does this surprise you?
Well, I'm curious to know more of what is known or thought to be known about the motivation, because the social media thing that you mentioned and the update of the Instagram profile, immediately afterwards raises the question, and it's a generational thing where social media is affecting mental health in such a negative way, but it's also affecting behavior. And so if the first thing you think of after you do something is your Instagram update, then it's entirely possible to think of that and say, well, maybe you did it so that you could give yourself an Instagram update, and so one leads to the other. So there's a lot to be thought about there.
Yeah, and it's hard to figure out what the actual motivation was. Of course, the police aren't saying anything. The legal proceedings are going to happen behind closed doors because of the Youth Criminal Justice Act, which we'll get into in a moment. And as far as the rumor mill, there's various versions of what's being said online, but kind of the main thread throughout the various stories is that there was some kind of altercation that involved the girlfriend and the 14-year-old girl and the victim, that involved like spitting back and forth. And the story that's commonly shared is that the 14-year-old boyfriend stepped in place of his girlfriend with a knife and fatally stabbed this boy as a result of something to do with spitting.
So the other thing that came to mind, and as you're listening to the reports as well, did the parents, did the community members, were they justified in feeling concerned? And so you think, well, was it a targeted killing or targeted situation where people knew each other, had a long-standing dispute of some sort, in which case you would think, well, the general public is perhaps not at risk. But if it's somebody that flew off the handle over a perceived slight or something that just happened in the moment, then that kind of a person is more dangerous in a sense to the general public and would therefore, in my mind, justify more information being shared. Yeah. It's a difficult thing with the Youth Criminal Justice Act because, listen, of course you have the social media aspect of it and people sharing their own information and videos and names and stuff online, but the official side, it's something that's done very carefully. So in that situation, if you were to release the names of these two 14-year-olds publicly in such a heated situation, that is going to, I think you could argue that would affect them long-term more than if their name was leaked later in the process in just the normal course of going to court or whatever, right? So it's a tough one for the police and the schools to handle.
Yeah.
But if the kid is out there advertising his advertising what he's doing, and I think there are precedents, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but as I recall in the past, there have been precedents where the name of perpetrators who are underage have been named by the police, maybe not as young as 14, but 16 and in that area.
14 is relevant too. I was going to say 14 is relevant because it's only at that point where you can't be charged with a crime until you're 12. You can be charged, the Crown can apply to have you sentenced as an adult from 14 on. So the name you publicly, and that goes with it, right? The adult sentencing, you get named. And so the fact that they're 14 and it's a serious offense would tend to justify that. And you're right, Paul. There have been other cases where that's been if it's a serious situation, of course.
and the kid, we're at a situation where you see it in, like in Chicago, for example. I was there recently where, last year, where an 11-year-old was running a carjacking ring and had been repeatedly arrested because they thought he was just an accomplice. They didn't realize he was the mastermind until a bunch of other things had happened and the 11-year-old was arrested. But the point is that this kid, without bragging about, taking his line from rap music, I'm down, I'll be out, I'll be on the street in no time, I'm only 14, and rubbing it in the face of authorities and society. And, the time has long passed where people in this situation should be held accountable and face the consequences of their action. And, maybe they're not going to get a life sentence, but maybe if a couple of people got serious long-term sentences at this age, it might send a message to others that they can't get around it so easily.
Mm-hmm. Before we go much further, I want to ask you, Adam, and just get this out there, is tell me about the Youth Criminal Justice Act. What is it? What benefits does it afford underage people charged with crimes in Canada? Why is it necessary? Like, what is the background on all this?
So yeah, for youth between 12 and 18, maximum sentence is 2 years, except for first degree and second degree murder, where first degree murder, the maximum sentence is 10 years, that being 6 years in jail, 4 years in basically house arrest-ish conditions.
Okay.
Second degree murder, it's 7, it's 4 and 3. All right, 4 years and 3 out. So that's the biggest thing. The biggest thing that drives everything else is the sentencing regime, which is basically even before you're arrested, the police, if it's a low-level offense, need to consider extrajudicial, non-court related things they could do. Just give you a lecture or something, right? Or whatever. Then at the sentencing stage, the judge is obligated to consider every reasonable alternative, basically, other than custody. As opposed to an adult sentence where that might just be, you're in that range, that's sort of what you think about first. But that's the Youth Criminal Justice Act. I mean, it was brought in, it's been in Canada since, I looked this up, 1908, the Juvenile Delinquents Act. So at that point, the act said that criminals, young offenders, delinquents, shall be treated not as criminals, but as misdirected and misguided children.
Okay.
But back then, Adam, there was incarceration. There were reformatories and youth jails.
Yeah. So that's the thing too. Like the court, so they get a pre-sentence report. If there's any consideration of jail, there's a pre-sentence report. The judge knows all about the youth offender, and and they're supposed to tailor the sentence to their needs, and there's lots of thought goes into that. But they have to consider what is actually out there in terms of services for the youth as well. I mean, they can't just say, well, they should go to a facility if there is no such facility, right? Some rehab place. But
What about this, though? Is a big part of the criticism of the Youth Criminal Justice Act in terms of this story at this point is the fact that shortly after the arrest of these two 14-year-olds, and again, keep in mind the context of the discussion surrounding, like, why aren't the police telling the public what is going on as you're searching for them? The first kind of statement the police make about that is, we've made arrests. Anyone who reveals their information online could be in breach of a publication ban and could be charged. What does the Youth Criminal Justice Act do to prevent the public from knowing who is charged in this case?
Yeah, this is I found this to be some degree of irony in the police's statement on this, because basically at the same time they were issuing that, the Crown prosecutor was in court saying, I'm going to seek an adult sentence, which would involve releasing their names. But at the same, if you think of the government as a whole, on the one hand, they were saying, don't you dare release their names because you'll be charged. And this is very serious. On the other hand, we think, these 14-year-olds that we've known for a day and a half should be sentenced as adults. I thought that was a little irony to that. I guess they must know them or feel they know them somehow. to make that announcement so soon in the process that they would be seeking an adult sentence. I mean, you have to do it. You're supposed to do it before plea, but for them to say that already, I thought was a little premature.
Well, it's quite clear these kids are not just a couple of goody two shoes who suddenly got into trouble. I think there's a long history. Even though they're 14, even though there's a girl involved, it's sort of idiot versus idiot relationship. I like him because he's tough. It's sort of a basic evolution. And you wonder why. Then there are pictures of this girl having a black eye that she probably got from him on the internet, and it's like an abusive relationship right from the beginning. But he may be an ass, but he's my ass. That sort of mentality. And then the other factor here that really bothers me is that the victim was a Syrian kid. I mean, when he came to Canada in 2016, there was he was featured in a story. Him and his brother Ahmad and Muhammad were featured in a story about going to school at Joseph Howe School and, the problems of the immigrants coming into Nova Scotia and the overpopulation at schools and the difficulties that we're having there. And I know a lot of Syrian people. I had Syrian immigrants work for me. They become friends. And I wonder if there's a racist component to this as well, which aggravates the situation.
I'm sure there was.
Because my understanding is that the two kids who were on the killing side of the equation were not Syrian.
No, from Lower Sackville, Canadians, so to speak, but yeah, to come like all the way from Syria, a war-torn country, your family escapes that probably with little more than the shirts on their backs, to end up in what a lot of people would see as a great place, the city of Halifax, to end up stabbed to death by two pieces of crap outside of a mall. It's just such a heartbreaking story. And 16 years old is so young. Like, these are all kids involved. But as far as the 14-year-olds that have been charged, what I want to ask you about, Adam, is and I'm a layman to this, is you hear this idea of like, we're going to charge them as adults or go for an adult sentence. What exactly does that mean? And what would that change for the public? Other than, of course, I'm assuming that would change the sentencing kind of range from what you described for a young offender to what an adult would be, the options an adult would have. But would it affect the actual trial? Like, would it open the doors and allow the public to learn what's happening?
It would. So the two big things that happen when you're switched up to be, an adult, treated as an adult, one is that opens up that whole range of sentencing, which, if it was first degree murder, that's life. They'll 20 years, this would be a huge change, just the sentencing regime. Second thing, though, that would come into place immediately would be the lack of publicity. Right now, the court would be, we wouldn't know their names or any of those things. Now we'd be able to follow along the trial if they were to be sentenced as adults, and that was done and that was determined right away. Not guaranteed, though, that it would be determined. It would have to be determined before sentencing, but it would be unusual for that to be done before trial. The determination. So the Crown needs to provide the notice in advance, and so the defense knows how. And the trial itself, the procedures, whether you have the right to a jury, all those things are the same. But we know their names. The problem is the determination is not going to be made likely till after the trial. So what's really going to happen is we'll go through the trial, if there's to be one, without knowing much about these people or who their names are. And then when it comes to the sentencing, that would be coming out.
Recently in Michigan, a couple were found guilty of providing their son with a weapon that he used in a mass shooting. Would there be a provision for going after the parents in this situation for not supervising their children? Because, as I understand it, one of these children would have frequently been in trouble with the law. Would there be a provision in Canada to go after the parents for abrogating the responsibility as parents?
And just another to add to that question as well is, does the Youth Criminal Justice Act, where it kind of reduces I guess, the punishment for the child, you think it should be structured to automatically include the parent in that, but
the other way, the parents don't get punished other than, through in a non-judicial sense, I guess, of having to deal with the publicity of it all, or, to the extent that it is public. No, the parents have to be there. They have to be notified, and they have to go to court with the young people. But the thing is, Paul, like in the States, there was no provision. I remember if I followed that case a little bit. I don't think there was any specific provision, but they were basically, I think, seen as like accessories to the homicide, or criminal negligence in some form there. So in that way, there would be no need for a new law in Canada, just a test case to see if that logic would be applied here successfully in front of a Canadian judge.
Well, something has to be done because, essentially we have kids who are being raised by the internet, many parents who essentially don't want to be parents and are using the internet to babysit their children. And I mean, it's a big issue. I mean, if you look at, the Globe and Mail the other day, we have a couple of things going on. One, we have school boards in Toronto, the Catholic School Board and the Public School Board, Peel and Ottawa, suing Instagram and TikTok for basically polluting the minds and changing the personalities of young people. Essentially, that's the case as I understand it. Mm-hmm. And then you have, like yesterday in Ontario, as much as you may like or not like Doug Ford and his government, they're sort of promoting a new law that will prevent cell phones from being used in schools by they'll be off for elementary children, and then in high school, not allowed in the room, which seems to be an attempt in Ontario to try to address this and try to rein in the influences and try to make kids at least pay attention to what they should be paying attention to.
Yeah. To which many of the listeners are like, wasn't that the way it is? Isn't that the way it is? Like,
you'd be surprised.
The way it is.
It's a bit of a double-edged sword, though, because like here in Nova Scotia, the amount of new immigrants to our school system that have English as an additional language, a lot of them rely on technology for translation and stuff. Like you can write on a chalkboard or a whiteboard in English. A child can have an app on their phone or an iPad or whatever that they point at your English writing, and in real time it converts it to the language they're more comfortable in. So it's like, are you maybe punishing some of the kids who can use that technology for learning, because there's a bunch of kids with crappy parents at home and they're, watching people get beat up on YouTube and they go and do something crazy.
I think for the 1% of students that need it as a translation app, will let them keep their phones.
Hell yeah.
Isn't it ironic that you have governments today who are more than willing to be social justice warriors and go out and prevent all members of society from doing something or encourage them not to do something? You're not allowed to smoke. You're not allowed to do this. You're not allowed to do this. We want you to do this. But when it comes to policing the internet and the effects it has on young children, you have governments saying, oh, well, that's a free speech issue. That's a this or that issue. We're reluctant to do that, to sort of infringe on the rights of the companies to do whatever they want to do, even if it is dangerous and deleterious to the people, the youngest people in our society, who are the future of the society and who are being obviously warped by what's happening. So you got the governments playing both sides of the coin here. I mean,
yeah.
You want to do everything to everyone and manage their lives and social engineer them. But when it comes to young kids and their brains and their malleable brains, oh, well, that's a free speech issue. What do you think about that?
No, that's you're bang on, Paul. Like, there needs to be more control of that, especially in the schools. I mean, the attention spans are low. Mental health is in crisis because of this, and it's just awful. Like, look at this. All right, so part of the Youth Criminal Justice Act is children have heightened vulnerability, but they also have less maturity and reduced capacity for moral judgment. I mean, look at this guy posting on Instagram. In a way, as a 14-year-old, that's almost an argument. Well, you could see it as an argument that, okay, we'll show this guy, we'll sentence him as an adult. He's not getting away with that. On the other hand, it's such a stupid thing to do that only somebody with less maturity and reduced capacity for moral judgment would do such a thing, and thus justifies the sentence as a young person. I mean, it's something else.
I thought the same thing. I'm just going to read you a couple. I've been following a lot of the online discourse surrounding this, and just what you described is exactly what I was thinking. But to give you a sense of what a lot of other people may think, for example, I'm reading a post in response to the police saying, don't reveal their information. One online commenter says, they posted the pictures. They don't give a crap. So why should the public? Meaning, like, they posted a picture of himself with the knife in his pocket. If he's online doing this, why should the public respect his privacy if he's bragging about it? And just as you said, he's a 14-year-old.
Yeah. Yeah. So he, for whatever his future may be, if he has any hope of a positive future, and I'll say the 14-year-old that was charged with murder in my, early law experience, going to a bootlegger's with a bunch of older teenagers, his mother and other adults, and the bootlegger got killed, unfortunately, and here he was, right? He was there. Mm-hmm. He has not been to court. He's had a good life since then. It can happen. But you don't want to, to the extent that, he's even too stupid himself to recognize he has a future, he needs to be protected. That would be the argument, I guess, for, not publicizing his name further than he's already done himself.
One thing we talked about earlier is, in some cases, they'll make a case for an adult sentence. We talked about the process that goes into that, but what factors are considered? If you're arguing that an adult sentence should be given, who makes that decision? Is it the judge? And what goes into that decision?
Judge makes the decision. It's interesting, I was looking there's a Supreme Court of Canada case in 2008, DB, it's the initials, right? It used to be the case that if you were charged with murder as a youth, you were presumed to be sentenced as an adult unless you could rebut the presumption by showing that you were less mature. And the Supreme Court said that was unconstitutional, and they reversed it. So it's up to the Crown to show that this person is, you take into account their level of maturity, and that's a hard thing to assess, but you get a pre-sentence report, you look at their education levels, you look at anything you can figure out about them. People that know them, all right, what are they like? Are they scatterbrained? Whatever. Then it's the seriousness of the offense, and here it's very serious, and whatever else you can find out about the person. I mean, it's a case-by-case basis. It's not an easy question to answer. Typically done with older teenagers, though. Like that DB case out of 2000, that was a 17-year-old, just below the line. 14-year-old, you're just above the line where it's even possible to ask for it. So it's going to be difficult, I think, to get these two sentenced as adults.
Well, there's another case going on in Newfoundland right now with a 14-year-old this month who killed a 65-year-old woman, and they're going through this application to have him tried as an adult.
Yeah.
I mean, it's, as I said, it's rampant, it's everywhere, and it's problematic. Mm-hmm. I mean, it requires something more, we can't just take this on a case-by-case basis, because the number of cases is growing right across the board.
You look at their criminal record too, if they have one, and any experience, whatever kind of disciplinary history they might have at school. If this person has just, been haywire since day one and, just now getting charged with a serious offense, well, that's going to work against them as well, and call for an adult sentence. So what we're hearing about the guy in particular, it sounds like he may have had such an extensive history, but still 14.
Yeah, the rumors circulating online is that he has a colorful history with interactions with the Youth Criminal Justice Act. There's allegations or rumors that drugs are a part of his and other members of his family's life. As far as where the case stands now, it'll next be in court. They're going to be held until their next appearance, which is mid-May. They've been given orders to not contact 4 other witnesses, to the case until, mid-May when the next appearance happens. But I just mentioned there that there's a lot of discussion online, specifically about the boy's family, specifically his mother. There's a lot of discussion about her background and her criminal status. But what I want to ask you about, Adam, is I thought, when you hear of a 14-year-old getting into trouble, I'm quick to think that I'm immediately like, what's the story at home? What's with his parents? How could this happen? We heard the story in the States. It seems like there's more to leading the parents of that mass shooter or of being charged. But in this case, if you're just a bad parent and your kid goes out and does something, what can, other than having your kids taken away from you, is it illegal to be a crappy parent?
Not really. No. But that's the way it always is with these kids, right? Well, not always, but when you see it so often, you look at these kids and you see their parents, and man, they did not have a chance.
Mm-hmm.
They had no positive examples in their life anywhere, right? Mm-hmm. So that's part of the considerations. Well, all right, they're 12, 13, 14 years old. What positive role model have they ever had? Maybe a teacher or two, but never at home. The most influential people in their lives could be the most dangerous people in their lives.
Yeah, I have a close friend who's a school teacher, and what they always tell me is you can have a child in your class that's an absolute terror, an absolute nightmare, but come parent-teacher day, all your questions are answered as to why they are the way they are. And yeah, it's like when you hear of two 14-year-olds killing someone, I have a feeling you meet their parents or spend an afternoon in the house that they grew up in or whatever, you're going to say oh shit.
Yeah. Well, it's not just good kids come from bad parents and bad kids come from good parents.
Yeah.
Largely, in many ways it's a roll of the dice because there's so many social media and other things, all kinds of influences that affect this. And so no matter how much you try as a parent to instill morality and standards and rules that a kid can abide by, once they get out in the world when they're 12, 13, 14 years old, it's almost impossible to deal with them. And that's been aggravated by the fact that parents today, not all, but many, want to be their kids' friends. So they don't want to basically be the parent, and they don't want anyone else reprimanding their kids. And I'm sure that your friend, the teacher, would see this as a problem. If they try to reprimand a kid, the parents are the kind of people who come in and say the teacher shouldn't be doing that.
Mm-hmm.
That it's my job to reprimand the kids and to set up a structure for the kids. If there's no structure at all, that's their structure. So that the whole notion of giving kids who are vulnerable a structure has been destroyed by the fact that we allow parents to supersede the schools, supersede everyone, and for their own selfish reasons, control these kids and basically aim them towards the sewer of life. I mean, because they won't provide a structure. They said, well, I want my kid to be creative. Well, guess what? I've been in prisons. I've seen people in prisons. I've talked to a lot of prisoners over the years. Many of the best prisoners are great artists because it comes from the same place in many ways. Sort of the ability to not be restricted. And so people say, look at all the great artists in prison. Well, that's the reason. They never had structure. And they have that ability to be creative, but in the wrong way.
Mm-hmm. Well, this story is going to continue to play out probably in the headlines of Nova Scotian or Canadian news outlets. The only updates and other things to really discuss at this point, I think, is the family of Ahmad Al Marrach has a GoFundMe that's being run with them as the beneficiaries. Their goal was $70,000 to cover funeral expenses and whatnot related to their 16-year-old son's death. At the time of our recording, I think it's at about $64,000. So what that's a sign of is that there's incredible public support behind them. I know there was a large turnout today on the day of our recording, the 28th of April, Sunday, downtown Halifax. They had a sort of rally for him that many members of his community were there for. So that was nice to see. But I think ultimately, this is just a tragic, horrible story. Sadly, Paul was able to rattle off a bunch of other examples of things like this happening. I don't know what the answer is, but I know, as parents, we have like the largest responsibility to humanity that I think anyone can, because we can, we're raising the future. But at the same time, there's also the slogan, it takes a village. And it does take a village to raise kids. So school teachers, education systems, politicians and lawmakers, police and law enforcement, everybody involved in this needs to look at how kids are treated under, whatever control that you have on the world. And it's, it just breaks my heart to see a 16-year-old lose their life and two 14-year-olds responsible. Tragic, but it says so much about our society at the same time.
Oh, that's great, Jordan. I think you said it right there.
I want to thank you for joining Adam, Paul, and myself for this discussion. Almost as soon as our mic stopped recording, there was an update in this case. The Halifax police have just announced a third teenager has been charged with second-degree murder related to the death of Ahmad Al Marrach. Police announced Monday morning that a 16-year-old, who officers had arrested shortly after the killing but later released, had again been arrested and now formally charged. Little more is known at this point, but I'm sure I'll have updates for you in the future. I'm going to end here by expressing my heartfelt condolences to the family and the loved ones of Ahmad Al Marrach. And additionally, I want to express condolences to the broader Syrian community as we've seen how this story has touched all of you. To anyone who's interested in contributing to the GoFundMe campaign, which is raising funds to support Ahmad's family, I've added a link in the episode description. Additionally, if there's anyone listening who's been touched by this case and would like to share their story, I'd very much like to hear from you. You can email me at nighttimepodcast@gmail.com. I hope to hear from you. Now I'm going to end this episode, but before I do, let me end with thanks. First, a big thanks to Paul and Adam for sharing another evening with me and with you, the listeners of Nighttime. I'd like to thank LJ from the Dystopian Simulation podcast, who provides my intro and outro voiceovers, and Monty Datta, who contributes the music for this show. And then lastly, but most importantly, a massive thanks goes out to each and every one of you listening to Nighttime, as without your interest and your support, this show would be as pointless as it would be impossible. Now, on the topic of support, let me thank the newest subscribers to the premium feed. Bryce, Cassie, and Letty, thank you for going premium. And for anyone else who'd like to support the show, you can help us out here in a variety of ways. First of all, a premium feed subscription costs just a couple dollars a month, and that money funds the creation of new episodes. But the premium feed will also give you those episodes 2 days early, get them to you ad-free, and give you access to a full back catalog of Nighttime episodes. If that sounds like something you're interested in, you can go premium at patreon.com/nighttimepodcast. And even if you don't want to go premium, you can still help the show grow by simply sharing this episode on social media and letting all your like-minded friends know why they should listen. Your support is very much appreciated. Now, to close this all off, let me again remind you to take care of each other, hug your loved ones tight. Let me know if you see anything weird.
The Nighttime Podcast is written, hosted, and produced by Jordan Bonaparte.